the cops greeting me by name completely threw the hoe off balance. You could see the confusion spreading across their faces, like they were trying to piece together a puzzle that didn't make sense. They had expected flashing lights, handcuffs, maybe even me being told to leave my own property. Instead, the officers were casually chatting with me, asking how the drive had been, and if I was finally ready to settle into the cabin. It was almost like we were old friends, and in a way, we were. What the hoe didn't realize was that I had spoken with the county and the sheriff's office weeks before moving in. I knew the history of this neighborhood, and I knew the hoe had a reputation for overstepping their authority. So, I made sure everything was done by the book. Permits, paperwork, property records, you name it, I had it covered. Still, I hadn't expected them to be this bold, calling the police on a homeowner just because they didn't like the idea of someone new living outside their control. The irony was almost too much. While the hoe members huddled together, whispering furiously and throwing me dirty looks, the officers were more focused on welcoming me than enforcing anything. One of them even pointed out how peaceful the area was, joking about how the biggest crime they usually dealt with out here was a raccoon knocking over a trash can. That only made the HOA's anger worse. But here's the thing, if they were this angry on day one, I couldn't help but wonder what else they might try. Would they keep pushing? Would they look for another way to make my life difficult? The smile I gave the officers was real, but in the back of my mind, I knew the battle with this hoe was only just beginning. As the cops eventually drove off, the air shifted. The hoe members no longer wore smug smiles. They looked rattled, but not defeated. That uneasy silence said more than words ever could. I knew they weren't just going to let this go. One woman, the one who had made the call in the first place, stepped forward and gave me a glare that could cut glass. She didn't yell this time. Instead, she said in a low voice, "This isn't over." Then she turned on her heel and walked away with the others trailing behind. That quiet threat lingered heavier than if she had screamed it. I spent the rest of the afternoon unloading boxes into the cabin, trying to shake it off, but the thought kept returning. Why were they so determined to block me? Was it just about control, or was there something else they were trying to hide? The way they had acted, it felt personal, almost like they had a stake in keeping me out. Later that evening, I learned from a neighbor who didn't seem to buy into the HOA's games that this wasn't the first time they had pulled something like this. Apparently, they had run off other newcomers before, making life so difficult that people sold their property within months. It was a pattern, and I was next on their list. That revelation added a whole new layer to the conflict. It wasn't just about me moving into my cabin. It was about standing up against a group that had been running the neighborhood like their private kingdom for years. Still, I couldn't ignore the nagging thought. If they were willing to call the cops on day one, what lengths would they go to next? And deep down, I knew I hadn't seen the worst of it yet. The days that followed felt like walking through a storm I couldn't see yet. Every time I stepped outside, I could feel eyes on me. Home members would slow their cars as they passed the cabin, rolling down windows just enough to glare. At night, porch lights from across the street would flick on whenever I moved around inside. It wasn't violent, but it was constant, like they wanted me to know I was being watched. Then, the small things started happening. My trash cans were knocked over, not once, but 3 nights in a row. A letter showed up in my mailbox with no name, just a note saying I was violating neighborhood standards. The strange part? I wasn't even in their HOA jurisdiction. It was as if they were inventing rules just to rattle me. The tension grew heavier, the kind that keeps you awake long after midnight, wondering what's next. The one neighbor who had warned me before pulled me aside one evening. He told me flat out, "They'll push harder until you give in." That's what they do. His words only confirmed what I already felt in my gut. This wasn't just about rules or appearances, it was about power, and I had accidentally walked right into the middle of their little empire. By the end of that week, I noticed something different. Home members weren't just circling in cars or leaving notes anymore. They started gathering near the end of my driveway, whispering in groups, pointing at the cabin, their frustration written all over their faces. Whatever they were planning, it wasn't subtle anymore. The pressure was building to a breaking point, and deep down, I knew the next encounter with them wasn't going to be as simple as a few glares or empty threats. Something was coming. Just when I thought their driveway gatherings were only meant to intimidate me, the conflict took a sharp turn I hadn't expected. One morning, as I was heading out to grab supplies, I found an official-looking notice taped to my cabin door. At first glance, it looked like something from the county, big bold letters, formal wording. But the closer I read, the stranger it seemed. It wasn't signed by any authority. Instead, it was a fabricated violation letter from the HOA, threatening fines and legal action if I didn't comply with their rules. The kicker: my property wasn't even inside their boundary. That moment told me two things. First, the HOA wasn't just bluffing anymore. They were escalating. And second, they were willing to cross into outright dishonesty to get what they wanted. The fake notice wasn't just intimidation. It was an attempt to make me doubt myself, to make me question whether I really had the right to stay. I kept the paper in my hands, feeling the weight of it. This wasn't just neighborhood drama anymore. This was a calculated move to push me out by any means necessary. And the more I thought about it, the more one unsettling question pressed on my mind. If they were bold enough to fake legal documents, what else might they be willing to do? Later that day, I noticed something else unusual. A couple of HOA members weren't just loitering this time. They were snapping pictures of my cabin, my truck, even me while I was outside. When I asked what they thought they were doing, they didn't answer. They just smirked and walked off, as if they knew something I didn't. That silence, paired with their sudden boldness, made me realize the fight was about to hit an entirely new level, and I wasn't sure what they had planned next. The fake notices and the constant surveillance finally pushed me to take action. I gathered every document I had, deeds, permits, county approvals, and drove straight to the sheriff's office. The same officers who had greeted me on move-in day listened carefully as I explained what was happening. When I handed over the fake violation letter, one of them raised an eyebrow and said, "This isn't just harassment anymore. This is fraud." Hearing those words gave me the confidence I needed. The sheriff agreed to pay the HOA visit, and I'll never forget the moment the patrol cars rolled into the neighborhood the following afternoon. The same group that had been standing at the end of my driveway now scattered like they'd been caught red-handed. The woman who had called the cops on me in the first place tried to argue, waving her hands and insisting they had authority, but the deputies shut her down fast, making it clear the HOA had no control over my cabin, my land, or me. Watching their faces fall as the truth finally caught up to them was a kind of justice I hadn't expected to see so soon. Just when I thought it was over, the twist came. As the officers wrapped things up, one of the deputies leaned over and quietly told me, "You're not the first. We've been waiting for someone to stand up to them." It turned out the HOA had been warned before, but always managed to intimidate newcomers into leaving before anything stuck. This time, though, the evidence was in my hands, and the county was finally ready to step in. The conflict had ended in my favor, but that last revelation made it clear this wasn't just about my cabin. I had unknowingly uncovered a much bigger fight than I ever expected. After that day, everything started to settle into place. The HOA could no longer pretend they had any power over me, and the sheriff's involvement shut down their attempts to harass me. The fake violation letter became the final straw, and once the county stepped in, their threats lost all weight. Neighbors who had once stayed quiet began opening up, some even thanking me for standing my ground. It turned out I wasn't the only one who had been targeted. Others had felt the same pressure, but didn't have the energy or resources to fight back. Life at the cabin slowly became what I had hoped for from the start. I could finally enjoy the quiet mornings, the smell of pine in the air, and the feeling of independence that came with living on my own land. The tension that once hung heavy over every moment started to fade, replaced by a sense of peace. Even the small things, like unpacking the last box or planting a chair on the porch, felt like victories. The HOA still existed, but they kept their distance. The group that had once circled my driveway now avoided me altogether. They had learned the hard way that intimidation wouldn't work anymore, not with me, and not with anyone else who knew their limits. Looking back, what started as a nightmare move and turned into a lesson I'll never forget. Sometimes people will go out of their way to control what isn't theirs, But standing firm, knowing your rights, and not giving in can change everything. My cabin became more than just a home. It became a reminder that boundaries matter, and that not all battles are fought with anger. Some are won with patience, preparation, and the courage to stay put.